Hey everyone, it's Finn here. So, my topic, I'm not really sure what it is, and I suppose what I'm going to do is I'm going to try and talk and hope that something comes out of it. I suppose the starting point that I have for this, whatever it's going to be, is how when I watched Wesley's contribution to Carson's discussion on online relationships, more specifically talking about this idea of authenticity, and the context that he was speaking about it was, being online. But I suppose it made me think about my authentic self, just generally in all aspects of my life. For me, being authentic is working towards allowing a dream that I have for my future, allowing that to become actualized. Transitioning for me has always been to try and become more authentic, and a thing that I'm kind of finding tricky is where is the cut-off point in realising that you are living your life authentically. But I think that is very complicated because I think in a way we're all in a constant state of authenticity, because you could look at a certain scenario and you could say you could have ulterior motives for reacting to a certain situation. You could consciously think about a reaction that you have before, you just react on impulse, and it can be very carefully considered and sort of contrived, and maybe you could argue that that is someone being inauthentic, but at the same time, I think that that is authentic because they done what they done, and it's kind of that acceptance of just being, and not thinking too much about it. And I'm not making any sense, but then on the other hand you can argue that no one is ever 100% truly authentic, that we can only be authentic in certain aspects of our life. So I can be working towards authenticity within how I identify within my gender and my gender expression and how I'm treated by others, but simultaneously I might not be fully authentic in terms of my mental health. And that's something that I actually find really tricky, is being able to know what's going on in my head, to be able to understand things. The way that my head works is that I'm a very impulsive person and I find it very hard to make a decision. I find it very hard to evaluate what I'm doing and why I'm doing it. I can only do it when I'm looking back on things, and it's in the past. So where am I even going with this? The last few months it's been in the forefront of my mind, working towards happiness. And for me to be happy would be, in some sort of way, to be authentic, or at least it would be a signifier. It would be a good indication that I'm opening myself to life, and if I'm doing that, then I think that there's something very honest about that. I don't know if that's a universal thing or if that's something that's just kind of specific to myself, but for a long time now I've been clinging on to the idea that I'm unhappy, and I have been unhappy with certain aspects of my life, but I don't think that unhappiness or happiness or any sort of emotion is something that can be 100% fixed. And so I've recently been trying to become more sort of mindful to the things that I'm doing, and becoming more active in the choices that are made that will directly result in my life and my mental state. And I've kind of had to redefine for myself what happiness is. Stop seeing it as something that is in the future that I'm striving towards, and although I may be doing that with some things like my transition, I've had to kind of rein it in a bit and realise that I'm living now. I'm not almost a person that I'm adding parts to and trying to sort of tweak and get it perfect so that I can then live. I mean, I think that I couldn't live before I was on hormones, but I think I'm now at a point where I know that I have to just accept that this is my life and understand the things that I have control over and what I don't, and to just be okay with that. And the more I work towards that, the more authentic I think I'm going to be. But yeah, authenticity of the self, identity, nice heavy shit for us all to ponder. Yeah, what do you think of it? I would love to know, because it's something that, like I said, I'm thinking about a lot, and I think generally I have an okay understanding of it, or I'm not too hard on myself really, but it's not always the case for me, and I know when I'm being irrational, but it's like I said, I don't know when I'm being irrational at that point in time, and I can get very carried away with my emotions. I'm very convincing, so there is times where I'll get really bogged down by this sort of stuff and yeah, get very cynical of humanity. I think that no one is ever authentic, no one is ever honest enough. I'm sorry that my thoughts aren't clearer, but I hope it made some sort of sense for someone and can spark some sort of conversation. Okay, so I'll see you all next week. Bye bye.
So today we're talking about authenticity of the self, and I'm astounded that this has come up, especially so soon, because this is something that I think about all the time, and I don't know if I realize that other people think about it as well. I guess it must just be one of those human things that people sort of ponder over reflectively and don't talk about much, so I'm glad we're talking about it. Authenticity of the self is something that I'm extremely paranoid about and often thinking about and worrying about, and it has very real implications on my life. The sort of authenticity that I am referring to is, I would describe it as acting in accordance with your essential nature. So behaving in a way that reflects who you are intrinsically or who you are in your internal world. And of course, conversely, acting inauthentically is going against your internal nature. It's a hard topic to talk about or explain, but the most illustrative example that I can think of is from the introductory video I made last week for this channel. And I was talking about how identity statements make me internally combust. And I said that flippantly, but I meant it more profoundly, because I actually do have problems with identity statements. Like I was talking about being fairly straight and, you know, a little bit asexual and not being sure completely one way or the other. The reason for that is if I say that I am one thing or another, I always feel fraudulent. I don't feel completely authentic saying that I am X or Y, and it troubles me. I guess the reason authenticity is so important is because it's the only way that we have to communicate with other people and convey to them about what happens in our internal world. And inauthenticity is a barrier to that dialogue. I guess there are quite a lot of people that would think that I should know if I am straight or gay or asexual, because a lot of people just feel it intrinsically. But I think I can genuinely say that I don't know and that I don't feel it, and for me to choose a label would be arbitrary and ultimately meaningless. And that brings me to kind of the existentialist position. So people like Jean-Paul Sartre, existentialist philosophers, think that existence precedes essence, which means that you're born without an essence or a self or a soul, and then you define yourself afterwards. Which would essentially mean that instead of having an internal world that you need to discover and then extrapolate from, that you would create yourself and define yourself as you see fit, whether that be consciously or subconsciously. And what Finn said kind of reminded me of this school of thought, because he said, I'm paraphrasing, I'm not sure if this is exactly what he meant, but that authenticity is that which leads to happiness. So I could make choices about myself that would ultimately lead to me being my happiest self. But I find that really difficult because I don't know what would make me happiest. Like, that's another identity statement which is elusive to me. So it's kind of like this paradox. I tend to think that the fact that I'm constantly worried about truth statements and questioning them seems to imply that there is a fundamental essence somewhere within me that is begging me not to go wrong, if that makes sense. There's also a possibility that there is an objective fact about who I am, but that on some psychological level I'm in denial about certain things that I don't want to acknowledge that are true, or maybe I want other things to be true that aren't true. So that's a possibility as well, but I don't know. I'll be really interested to see what other people have to say. Yeah, I'll see you next week, maybe.
So, cool. I'm going to be responding to, Finn, what you said about the authentic self, which I want to thank you for raising that topic, because it's one that really is dear to my heart. Yeah, it's something that I've thought about a lot throughout the years, because there have been a lot of times in my life that, actually earlier in my life mostly, that I felt very inauthentic. I felt sort of separated from myself, like I wasn't really, I don't know, living my life was the way that I felt it, you know. And as I've sort of mentioned in a couple other places, there's a lot of like questions of like why that came up with that. And that was a very like kind of dark place for me. I had a lot of anxiety in how I dealt with other people, a lot of depression in terms of my day-to-day life. So really not a fun way to live. I didn't really like being here on the world when I was struggling a lot with that. Really for me, the distinction was whether I was doing something because it came from somewhere in me, or whether I was doing something because it was going to make somebody else happy, or I thought it was something that was expected of me from somebody else, like, you know, my parents, or what I was supposed to do based on a religious sort of a basis, versus something that more just came out of that part of me that you could call the true self, soul, the authentic self. So as I did these things, as I sort of broke those expectations, which was something that was kind of scary at the time for me to do, you know, the thought about losing support from people that I had worked so hard to get support from. Not even like worked hard as in like consciously tried, but there's just this pattern for me that's my inauthenticity, is doing things to not rock the boat, I guess would be a big way that I get caught in something that doesn't feel right to me. So also, there's a lot of like theory and thought within like psychological literature about what authenticity is, and since that's kind of an interest of mine, I kind of want to talk about some of that. And this is a distillation of a lot of different people's thoughts, predominantly people like D.W. Winnicott, Wilhelm Reich, Alexander Lowen are some of the people that I'm drawing this from. There's tons more, but I just want to sort of mention those three. And basically talking about this process of how the true self gets frustrated in its emergence into the world. And basically their basic theory is that as a child you're naturally expressing something that comes from what's essentially you. and that based on how the world meets that, either it's allowed to continue or it's stopped in some way, and you develop sort of a roundabout pattern to get around that frustration that happened in your life, and that becomes sort of this like adaptive self that protects you and keeps you safe within that environment that you were raised. But it's not based on, it doesn't come straight from that authenticity, it comes as a response to that environmental frustration. So basically, when we grow up, things happen, and there are parts of us that get shut down in a certain way, especially 1,000 different things. I don't need to sort of mention them all, because I think everybody who watches this will say, okay, yeah, I can see where I wasn't really either allowed or wasn't really encouraged to be this thing that felt so right for me to be, because it was just something that came naturally out of who I was. So, yeah, that thought is that we really need the right kind of meeting from the people in our lives in order for that authentic self to come out into its expression. And since that never happens perfectly, it's always this struggle of how to remove those blockages, because once we get them installed, we kind of carry them, is the theory, with us throughout our lives until they get questioned, challenged, until we work with them in that, you talk about mindfulness, sort of noticing how that stuff, the ways that we are, comes from this old pattern. And, that's, for me, I've had a lot of really great therapists and people like that I've worked with that have helped bring out of me something that felt more real, something that felt more true. So I believe very strongly in that as a way to get more in touch with your authentic self. Yeah, so for me, it's about how I'm showing up in the world, whether something that's true from inside me, or not whether or not maybe, but how smoothly something that's true inside me can sort of move and be expressed into the world, versus something that there's a blockage and it sort of like has to go and change itself somehow and then get around that, and then it's like this that's coming out instead of just this natural sort of thing that wants to happen out of that deeper level. So I guess, and one thing you said, that authenticity is something that we are always doing. I kind of like that was a thought that was raised in the movie I Heart Huckabees. The main character was asked this question that he was supposed to talk to himself. He was supposed to say to himself, how am I not myself? How am I not myself? How am I not myself? And it's like, yeah, of course, moment to moment, you are the person you are, and it can't be any other way. And there's a realness to that. At the same time, that can either feel very good and like, kind of feeling it's natural, just that flow of who you are in the world, or it can feel very like, kind of like jerky as you kind of push forward into whatever it is that you're moving into. And so I think that question of authenticity has a lot to do with how right we feel in the world. And I think, and the last point I want to raise, because I see that I don't have a lot of time left here, is how we need other people, and how a person who can really meet what is coming out of you and just hold that and not meet it with judgment or criticism, or not slam it down, but allow you to open it up and explore it, to meet it with curiosity instead of judgment, can be such a gift. And I have been infinitely thankful for the people in my life, friends, like I said, therapists, in the past, who have allowed me to be myself more and more deeply. So, blessings to all you guys too. I guess I probably have a lot more I could talk about on that topic, but thank you, man, for raising it. Yeah.
Authenticity is acknowledging our ego, but not letting it run our lives. Authenticity is being connected to nature, our true selves. I feel completely authentic when I'm in the ocean, when I'm connected to the water that is responsible for all of us being here, water that connects us all together, that's moved by the moon, to move in the water, to experience life without immediate breath. I want to be authentic, and I guess being authentic is not denying the state that you're in, not the United States, not denying emotion, not denying struggle, not denying your hardships, and not denying your rejoices, and not denying happiness. You know, if you're happy, then be happy. If you're sad, be sad. Being authentic not only helps you as a person, as a human, it also helps all the people around you to know that it's okay to be authentic. You know, being open and honest, authentic. Like, just be authentic. Not allowing authenticity is like a drain in a sink, okay? It's like the drain, all right? And all these things get like put in there. All those things get stuck, because they're not allowed to be fluid. Emotions, struggles, concerns, rejoicing, happiness, blessings. Those things get stuck, and then when the water and the flow of life happens, they clog up. So then that becomes a real problem, because then when the wellspring of authenticity gets unstuck and flows through, you don't know what is up or down. So I think being authentic is helping, letting the flow of life happen as it happens, and accepting it as it is, because I really believe that everything that's happening right now is exactly what's supposed to be happening, good or bad. So just go with the flow, I want to be authentic. I want you to be authentic. I want ice cream. I want more ice cream. I'm authentic. I love ice cream. And we recently got a Menchie's in my town, and I have a little Menchie's card now. So when I go, I swipe it and I get points. Special rewards means free ice cream. Stoked on that. Now, this is a conversation, so anybody who's watching this, you, I think it's amazing, and I think that you should contribute. So post yourself a comment, a video response, reblog this shit, I'm super excited to see what people have to say about this, because this is not the end. Just because I'm a third person doesn't mean it has to stop here. Alright, I'll talk to y'all later. Bye.
Let's go out back.